Well, Andrew, it's always great getting to connect with you. You have been on my past show before. I've had you on Christian Broadcasting Network. I love your story. For those who don't know you, you spent years on the NYPD, the New York Police Department, before entering full-time ministry. And obviously, you now fight spiritual battles before you fought crime. But let's talk about, and I know this is a loaded question because I know your story and I love it. At some point, you had a pivot point moment where you were on the job and you were opened up to the spiritual realm and understanding what it was. Can you take us through that pivotal moment?
Yeah, well, the pivotal moment was the rooftop encounter that I had with God. But just a quick lead up to it. You know, working in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where I worked in the 80s and 90s, that was when crack cocaine just came out. So there was a ton of drug abuse, violent crime, and demonic warfare going on in the streets of New York City. And I would see these manifestations of evil, and that's what I'm going to call them, on a regular basis because, you know, the average person, whether on drugs or not, does not have the strength of 10 people when you have police officers over 200 pounds trying to hold somebody down that's 150 pounds. There was a supernatural component to the violence, to the anger, and it was obvious even before I really had my rooftop encounter with God, which opened my eyes completely to the spiritual realm. You were able to see snippets of it just working day to day. And the other officers that I worked with, I'm sure when I share my story, a lot of them, when I mention that component of evil, they agree right away because even if they
Oh,
don't fully comprehend it, they know it's real because they've witnessed it and experienced it.
wow. That is not what I was expecting you to say. I would have thought you were going to say, my other police officer friends, they think I'm crazy. So I mean, you're like, no,
Well,
they're
that too, but they thought I was crazy before God, and then after God, they even thought I was more crazy. So, yeah, that was definitely a component of it. But leading up to the rooftop, to answer your question directly, seeing the things that I saw on a regular basis caused PTSD. I'm even going to say critical incident stress, and in my case, I don't want to say suicidal ideation, but hopelessness, which led to my moment on the rooftop where I had my showdown with God. And as you know, Billy, I've shared it before. I was working one day and I was just like a soda bottle ready to explode from my own personal baggage. And a lot of it was in the subconscious realm. And seeing what I saw on the street, which would trigger it day to day. One of the guys I work with said, "Columbia, you look like you're going to explode." And when he told me that, I felt like I was exposed and that the tough veneer, the macho, the bodybuilder, the big Italian tough guy with nicknames of Evil and Iceman was melted in about a minute because I was exposed. He saw through me. So I didn't know what to do with that. And that evening, I was working a security job part-time in Harlem, New York. I used to work at a building in Harlem. It was actually a nice building. And I'd go up to the roof around 3 o'clock in the morning and lock up. And that night, after the shift, I went to that job and I'm walking up the stairway to the rooftop and I begin to talk to God. I begin to yell at God, scream at God, curse at God. It was like everything in me, all the struggles, all the insecurities, the fears, all the issues that I had from the job and even personal just came out in that moment. And I went up to that rooftop yelling, screaming, cursing at God. And the crescendo of it was I took out my gun, I waved it in the air, and I said, "God, if you're real and you're there, what's stopping me right now from blowing my brains out? I want to know if you're real. I want to know if you're there. And I want to know if you love me." And it was in that moment that I had this epiphany. It was very similar to Paul on his Damascus Road encounter, where this bright light, and it was a light and a presence, just enveloped me. The best way I could describe it is like a tractor beam from heaven came over me and stopped me in my rage, fury, frustration, fear, anger. The light, instantly I recognized it as the presence of God. And in that moment, in a supernatural encounter, all of my questions, all of my fears, all of my doubts were answered. That I knew I was in God's presence. And without even me asking those things that were deep in my heart that I was wrestling with, God answered them in a way that I can receive it. And I felt this love that I've never felt this before, this peace, this supernatural presence. And as I'm in this presence, my hands began to go up in the air, and I began to say the name Yahweh over and over again, but it was almost like a song. It was, you could call it tongues, I guess, if you want to. I don't remember anything other than just saying Yahweh, almost singing, and the presence intensified so much that in that moment, I was like caught up with the Lord. There was no time, no space, no matter. It was just me and God. It was a personal, supernatural revelation that instantaneously changed my life. And then it stopped just like that. And now I'm left standing on the roof, and then the human brain kicks in. What just happened? Was that real? Or am I nuts? I immediately started to question after I came out of the presence. So, human beings, what do? We fight or we flight. So I ran downstairs. I go to the guy downstairs. I said, I'm going home. He said, what's the matter? I said, I got to leave. And I'm in my car, and I'm driving from Harlem to Staten Island, and I'm reliving this encounter, and I'm loving it, but yet I don't fully understand it. And I'm not feeling the presence like I did before. So my brain's questioning. And now when I look back on it, I think the devil came right away to snatch it.
Oh, yeah.
The devil wanted to take it from me. So I'm wrestling in the car. I get home. It's about 3:30 in the morning. And I wake my wife up at the time. And I said, you're not going to believe what just happened to me. And she said, what happened? And I shared the encounter on the rooftop. Now, what I didn't share with you in that encounter is when I asked God what was wrong with me, he spoke to me and said, you were molested as a child. And the words came out of my own mouth. And I said, God, if this is real and this is true, I want another sign. And the words came out of my mouth again. You were molested as a child. I said, God, if this is true and this is real, I want another sign. And the third time I asked is when the presence intensified, when my hands went up in the air and I began to say Yahweh. And I knew that that was true. And I knew it was buried in my subconscious because there were moments it tried to come out and I suppressed it. When my grandfather died, I felt something, I saw something, a vision, something, and it went right back. And I couldn't understand it because I wasn't ready to deal with it. So when I'm telling my wife this at the time, she says, no wonder why you have so much anger in you.
Wow.
When she said that, I felt something deep in my stomach well up, and I let out this roar. It was like, roar, and I felt this evil thing leave.
Wow, come on, that's awesome.
And then the minute it left, the presence came back. And I started saying Yahweh. I started speaking in unknown tongues. I'm going to say that's what it was. And the presence of God intensified to get me through that moment. And then once again, it stopped. So I'm overwhelmed, glad, not fully understanding. I share the rest of the story with her. I go to sleep. I wake up the next morning. I look in the mirror and I'm a different person. I feel like 1,000 pounds was lifted off my back. I used to have a scowl on my face. I used to walk around angry. I would curse all the time. I was frustrated a lot. I was a weightlifter. I was taking supplements that probably didn't help my frustration and anger because I was lifting heavy weights and I was a big guy. And all of that, when I woke up that next day, felt gone. I just felt a peace and a presence, but I still didn't fully comprehend it. So I'm going to work and I say, who am I going to talk to about this? I can't tell anybody. They already think I'm crazy. If I start telling them about this, they're going to say, this guy snapped. So I go to work and I'm just acting myself. And people look at me and say, Columbia, you're different. What happened to you? And the only answer I had was, I'm not angry. That was all I could say. And they said, what do you mean? I said, I'm not angry. I look different. I wasn't cursing. We used to go to the bar after work and slam down shots and beers. That's what cops do to deal with the PTSD and the stress. I went to the bar that night. I had one drink, put it down. I don't need to drink. The guys that I work with said, Columbia, what's the matter with you? How come you're not drinking? I'm not angry. I didn't need to drink.
Can I step in there I need to, like what you're talking about. There are a lot of people listening or watching when you had that realization that you had been violated, right?
Yes.
and you had all of this anger and all of these things, and this is a really complicated topic, so I want to navigate this the right way. You know how to navigate it because we've talked about this before. The way that you're impacted after something like that happens to you, the way that you're impacted spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, all of it can change your life. It could put your life on a totally different trajectory, right? That anger that you're talking about and that immediate release that you had once you dealt with it. Can you just address that for people who maybe they haven't dealt with these own things, their own things in their lives? Maybe they haven't thought through how to do this. When you are violated, how that spiritually impacts you. Just can you unpack that a little bit for us?
I'll try. It's when you're violated as a child and it's so evil and wicked that you suppress it and you don't want to deal with it. What happens is, growing up, I had this fear because of something that was hidden and dark in my life. And I didn't know how to talk about it or address it, obviously. So the fear turned into anger. And there was an interesting dynamic that took place, Billy. I was young when this happened to me, maybe 4 or 5 years old. So when I became a teenager, now you're going through the hormonal stuff and it comes time to date and you're attracted to, the opposite sex and things like that would happen. I would feel very uncomfortable and weird. And when the normal kids in my classmates, 7th, 8th grade, they started to date, I would not do that. I just felt I couldn't go there. There was something about intimacy that made me very uncomfortable, and I didn't want to deal with it. Even though I liked girls and I was attracted to them, I just didn't have, something told me, don't do it. And I just kind of pulled back personally. And then here's another part to it, which I really don't talk much about, but I think it needs to be talked about. Because the violation was from a man, when I would be around homosexual men, I would feel extremely uncomfortable. And I knew it was spiritual. I would almost feel like frozen. When I would sense that spirit around me in any way, it would bring such a fear that it would almost incapacitate me. So as I got older, how I dealt with that was doing the exact opposite. I'm going to conquer that fear I'm not going to let that fear get the best of me. I'm going to get the best of that fear. So what did I do? I had a hatred towards homosexuals. I would act out angrily and violently towards homosexuals. If I felt that uncomfortability, vulnerability, and fear, I would address it with taking charge. And I'm not going to let that take charge of me. I'm going to take charge of it. And that was a battle that I had through my teenage years, which caused a lot of confusion, even into my young adult years, where I battled with these emotions and feelings, and I constantly questioned, why am I feeling like this? Why is this making me feel this way? I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't nail it because I wasn't in the spirit. And I wasn't born again to understand spiritual warfare and demonic spirits like I do now. But I was aware of it. Even back then, I was aware of it. So it affected me emotionally. It affected me with relationships. It affected me with so many levels of my life where I always felt like I had to prove myself and my manhood by being the best at everything. The best athlete, the strongest, the biggest, the best looking. I always tried to perfect myself to hide anything from the past that was vulnerable and weak and made me afraid. But really, that fear was, fear and anger are partners in crime. I don't know if you know that, but fear and anger work hand in hand. And when you cross that line from fear into anger, that's when violence comes. And I became violent. As a police officer working in the inner city, working with people that, were violent at times because of drugs, alcohol, or other things, I made sure I got the upper hand. So if anyone was going to get hurt, it was them, not me. And I was big, I was strong, I was aggressive, and I'm not proud of how I used to do my police work the first several years I was a police officer, but because of these issues that I had in my own life and some of these spiritual things, they would manifest on the job, and I would act out in ways that were extremely aggressive, not only with perpetrators, but even with officers that I worked with. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there, Billy, a lot to unpack.
when you had, so you have this like deliverance moment, really, that's what I would call it.
Yes,
where you're
it was
screaming
definitely a
out
deliverance
this
moment.
thing, just this, this demonic presence leaves you.
Yeah.
You go to work the next day, your coworkers are like, wow, you're really different. And you're like, well, I'm not angry anymore. Did that anger and sort of pattern of aggression, did that ever return because it was a habitual pattern? Or did you kind of just like, it was one and done, like you stopped having aggressive behavior? I'm really interested.
You know, for me, that rooftop encounter was kind of a one and done in the sense of God delivered me from all those deep rooted sin issues that were attached to that sin. And I didn't share the other part of it, which Billy knows, where there was a cop that I worked with that was a Christian, and on a Sunday morning, maybe a week or two after that event happened, we're driving around, and he asked me if he could put on a Christian radio station, and I said, go ahead. And this guy starts telling his story about how God changed his life, and I'm listening to it, and I said, pull over. And he goes, why? I said, what that guy just said happened to me. And I shared with him what happened to me, and that I didn't fully comprehend it. And he said to me, when I shared it, he said, you asked God what was wrong with you, didn't you, on that rooftop? I said, yes. He said, he told you, didn't he? I said, yes. He goes, how do you feel? And I said, healed. The light bulb went on. I realized God delivered me from that. And then instantly, when I knew, when my confusion was done, when I was done wrestling with the rooftop encounter and he gave me clarity, I ran to God, and the Holy Spirit just got a hold of me in a supernatural way where I was on fire. I started preaching almost immediately, telling people my testimony as a cop in uniform. I would lay hands on people, cast demons out of people, pray over children. God just totally flipped my life, my career, and gave me a ministry instantly of what I was delivered from.